So tonight I am going to be teaching you all how to stitch the Jacobean Pheasant kit and ornament. And there's going to be 3 classes in this series. The first class we're going to focus on the first part of the stitch guide, which is the pheasant itself. So yeah, the first 2 classes, so this week and then next week, is going to be focusing on the stitching, and then the final week I'm going to show you how to embellish your Jacobean ornament. So we had finishing kits. I'm looking around to see if I have one close by. I don't, but I am so excited about the finishing embellishments because we're going to do these little berries. They're stump work, like a stump work technique. They look really fancy. They're easier than they look. They're a total blast, so I can't wait for that class. Yeah, so like I said, we're going to be finishing or stitching the pheasant today, and then the next week we're going to be focusing on the stitches in the background, and the stitches in the pheasant are a blast. Now, not everybody loves bullion and French knots, and I'll show this to you once I've got my camera flipped around and my lights on and everything, so you can see it better. But when I first learned bullion knots, I was told you either love them or hate them, and I love them. They take a little bit of practice, but I think people are intimidated by them, and they shouldn't be. They're a total blast. But I do have, within the stitch guide, I do have alternative stitches for those of you who just really don't like knots, which is totally legitimate, and I'm going to show you how to do those as well. So an alternative stitches for the bullion and French knot feather detailing, and then alternative stitches for the freeform leaf stitch up here as well. So we'll go all through that. So if you have the stitch guide, I'm essentially going to be working through the stitch guide. There's repeat stitches, so I won't, go over the repeat stitches as we go, but having that close by will be helpful, especially because I'll probably be referencing some of the illustrations in the stitch guide, and you can take a look. Okay, let's see. So we're at 7:05. I think we can go ahead and get started. So you'll see I have put this piece on stretcher bars, and yeah, I think this one is, I'll go back and forth between using stretcher bars or not, but I think this is a good piece to put on stretcher bars, as we'll be doing, the decorative stitches. So yeah, I also want to show you really quickly this piece stitched all in 10 stitch. So I did this in the last couple weeks, and I will say I had so much fun stitching this up in 10 stitch. So this is another just way to go. I think it doesn't lose anything. The design doesn't lose anything by being stitched in 10 stitch. It was extremely relaxing, just so much fun. So if you are looking for a relaxing piece to work on, then doing it like this would be a great option. But if you're looking for, to just learn new stitches and have a lot of fun, then I'm excited to dive into this. Okay, so kind of just starting, really just diving right in and into the stitch guide. I'm going to show you guys how to do 10 stitch. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with 10 stitch, but let's just go over it really quickly. So what I have, the first thing I'm going to be working with is DMC 783, and this is DMC stranded cotton. Love working with this thread, especially as it's a wonderful price point. They are about 60 cents at Joann Fabrics or Hobby Lobby. And they're really pretty. They just have a really pretty shine, and they're very durable. So it is a stranded cotton, so you're going to want to strand it. And for those of you who don't know what stranding is, you're going to cut yourself a length, and I'm cutting this very short just so it's more manageable for the video. So you're going to cut yourself a length, and then you're going to tap the end, and there are 6 different individual strands in this length, and so you're going to pull each one out. And the way I do that is I hold it loosely in my hand and you pull straight out like so. And we're only going to use 4 of the strands. Now, when I stitched this in 10 stitch, I used all 6, just so that it matched the bulk of the other threads that we're working with, which are, Tilly Thomas Essentials and Pepper Pot Silk. And so 6 strand looked better, but for the decorative stitch version, we're going to do 4 strands and then put those 4 strands back together, tie them in a knot, and you're ready to go. So I'm just going to stitch the beak here, starting off in a 10 stitch. And you're going to put your waist knot over to one side, and we're going to stitch over that thread along the back, locking it in place. And you're just going to come up, go over one intersection of the canvas, go down, and that is your first 10 stitch. You're going to come up again, go over one intersection of the canvas, and again, second 10 stitch. Now, once we've gotten to the end of this row, we're going to reverse and go back the other way. And this is actually a Continental 10 stitch. There's 3 different types of 10 stitch: basket weave, Continental, and half cross. And Continental, what you want to do is notice that we were coming up in the bottom left-hand corner of the intersection and going down in the top right-hand corner of the intersection. So bottom left to top right. Now, when we were working from right to left, when we reverse direction, so we're going to work from left to right, we're going to go up in the top and over the intersection and down. So we're actually reversing the way the stitches worked. And the reason for that is that you get these long diagonal stitches on the back of your canvas, and you want that. If you're working the stitching correctly, you'll get either short upright stitches or a combination of short upright stitches and long diagonal stitches that alternate by row. And that all comes from reversing the way the stitches work depending on the direction you're working it in. And my understanding is that the reason you want to avoid that, A, it gives a lot better coverage to have those long diagonal stitches on the back. And then B, over time, your piece the stitching will actually kind of warp if you've got alternating rows of long diagonal stitches and short upright stitches on the back. It'll all looks the same from the front, but yeah, that's the correct way to work the stitch. Okay, so I'm going to just bring this up over here and get it out of the way. And that is how you stitch a Continental 10 stitch. And that thread, it should be locked in okay on the back, so I'm going to go ahead and get that out of our way here. Okay. All right, so that is our 10 stitch. Now we're going to be stitching 10 stitch all in his head here, the red of his head and his chest, and then all this portion of the wing that isn't bullion and French knots is going to be 10 stitch, with the exception of these areas right here. I actually did in Satin Stitch, and I'll be showing you that next. This is also Satin Stitch, so I'm going to show you how to do the eye patch in satin. But his feet are also 10 stitch. These leaves back here are 10 stitch, and the interior of the pomegranates are 10 stitch. So, I would suggest probably doing basket weave for the leaves, and we'll get to that next week. And potentially basket weave in here as well. Sometimes you need to have several rows of intersections, at least 2, to do basket weave effectively. So you're definitely going to be using some tent in here, or some Continental, excuse me, in here. So this, and this, and his legs are all 10 stitch. All right, we've got a question. Hang on just a second. How do you choose the order of what to stitch when? Light to dark or section by section? Great question. Boy, I feel like I think I would say I go section to section more than anything. Especially with this piece, I think, the head just felt like the right place to start. And the background, I left for last, and the wreath I left for after I did the pheasant. And so in some ways it was just what felt intuitive to me. There is something to be said for, like, if you are stitching a lot of white or a lot of delicate thread, for leaving that for last, just because, there's more of a chance of it getting dirty as you handle the piece, or, especially if you tend to like take it places, stitch in the car or something like that, then kind of leaving, white or delicate areas. And when I say delicate areas, I mean maybe, using a more delicate thread that could get worn more easily, for last. But I tend to kind of just dive in and do what feels natural to me. I could have stitched the background first, but it just seemed natural to leave it for last. And because he's the focal point, kind of diving right into him felt natural as well. Now, when it comes to, I definitely did the tent stitch and the diagonal knitting. We're going to get to this later. Here in the background of his wing, like I did the flat areas before I then went in and put the textured stuff in. So I did the tent stitch here, I did the horizontal goblin here, I did the diagonal knitting, and then I went in and put in all these kind of textural knots and stuff after the fact. Okay, so next up, we've got Satin Stitch. And again, I am using 4 strands of DMC cotton. And this one is 3712, it's the pink. And I've gone ahead and I've already stranded my thread. And with Satin Stitch, essentially we're taking long stitches that cover the area, and we're doing it on the diagonal. So you can do it from bottom left to top right, or from top right to bottom left. So you can angle it this way along the canvas, or you can angle it this way. But for the eye patch, we're going to angle it from bottom left to top right. And all we're going to be doing is just following, again, that diagonal of the canvas. So I'm going to follow this pink area all the way down. So all these pink intersections on the diagonal. And you can use a laying tool here if you want to. My thread got caught. Hold on just a second. There we go. But, I rarely do. I find that I can get my thread to lay pretty decently without one, and that, because that got caught, that didn't go super well, but you can always raise it up, and sometimes I'll kind of do this with my needle if I need it to be a little flatter. So I'm going to come back up, and again, just follow that diagonal of the canvas. And oops, I'm getting caught again. It's a little bit of an unnatural position to work in with a phone in front and lights all around, but okay, there we go. And then let me see, because the eye is in the way, these are just going to be essentially tent stitches. And we're just going to follow. See how I'm ending? I'm also just ending, at the end of the area. So here we go. We can take a big stitch again. And then I'll go back and grab that one I missed. Okay. So you can see also the reason that we strand our DMC cotton is because that really helps that to lay really smoothly. So that's satin stitch. We're going to go over satin stitch again when we get to the wreath along the outside, because all of these leaves are done in satin stitch and they're actually angled different ways, as is the pomegranate leaves. So we'll do more of that next week. But again, this area is also done in satin stitch, and it's angled the same way that the eye patches as well. So from bottom left to top right. And again, you're just following that diagonal of the canvas. So if you are comfortable and familiar with basket weave, that's the same diagonal that we're talking about. Okay. And as I work through these stitches, guys, yeah, just feel free to pop any questions in the question box. Okay, so next I'm going to grab Tilly Thomas Essentials Crawfish 561. And this is a twisted thread, so we're not going to strand it. And I'm going to show you how to do the herringbone stitch along the neck here. And that is this one right here. And rather than leaving a knot on top so I don't get too messy, so you guys can see, I'm just gonna leave a knot on the back, but you guys will want to put a waist knot on the top. So I'm gonna come right up right here at the very top and on the left hand side, and I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3 intersections and then down. And then I'm going to come up at the top on the other side. And I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4 intersections and down. So you can see that it's actually crossing over that first stitch and creating a V. And then I'm going to repeat that. So I'm going to come up 1 hole down from where I originally started, and go over 1, 2, 3 intersections. And then up 1 hole down from my previous one, and go over 4 intersections. So they're making this sort of crossover pattern at the base. It's really quite pretty. And that's it. Herringbone, just, you know, do any area that kind of has that V shape. Herringbone is just such a really lovely stitch to use, and you can kind of adjust it to fit an area really well. So I have a kit coming out this month that has some herringbone variations in it, so you'll see that. Yeah, it's just a great stitch, very pretty stitch that can be fit into a lot of different areas. So. All right, I'm going to you always want to bring your thread up or your needle up when you're not using it to the front of the canvas so that it is out of the way and doesn't get tangled. Okay, let me see. I think... Actually, I'm going to keep using this one. I think what I want to do is, yeah, let's do French knot. So I would first want to stitch the neck in a 10 stitch, and just follow the stitch guide in terms of stitch order. But I'm going to go ahead and show a French knot to you here, even without having stitched that. And if you guys are just wanting to stitch along, you'll be able to go back and tuck, 10 stitches into this area even after you've stitched the French knots, but it does make it easier to stitch the 10 stitch first. Okay, So what you're going to do is you're going to come up and then you're going to take the thread as it's coming out of the canvas and your needle, and you're going to wrap that thread once around your needle. And then you're going to, well, let me redo that. Okay, so wrap it around, and then you're going to put your needle down over the intersection. So essentially just like you were taking a 10 stitch, but you've actually created this wrap, single wrap around your needle before you're, sort of taking that final tent. So what I'm doing now is I am maintaining tension. See how I'm pulling this thread? This is the thread that is coming out of the canvas, wrapping around the needle, and then coming off the needle. And I'm maintaining tension on that thread. And you can see that it is, that wrap is at the base of the needle. I want it down there as much as possible. And part of the way I get that is by putting my finger down here. And then I'm just going to gently pull my needle through. Now, as soon as my needle's through, I'm going to release tension on the thread. I don't want to keep pulling because there's nothing keeping it there. It would at that point mess up the knot, right? We're maintaining tension as it's wrapped around the needle. And once that needle's gone, let it go. And then I'm going to keep my finger on top of it, and I'm going to pull that knot all the way through until I feel it stop. And I'm going to lift my finger off and give it a few gentle tugs. You don't want to tug too hard because the knot can actually pop through the canvas. Now let me show you without my finger in the way, but using your finger keeps everything just nice and secure as you're doing that motion of pulling it through. Okay, so I've wrapped. I'm going over the top of the intersection, down into the hole, maintaining tension, pulling my needle through. As soon as it gets through, I loosen the tension on that thread and I pull through gently. So again, come up at the bottom of the intersection, wrap once around your needle, go down, make sure that knot is at the base, maintain tension on the thread, pull it through, release tension, and gently pull all the way through. Now, you don't have to, you can do this any way you want. You can come up at the top of the intersection, go down and over it. You can come up on the right side and go down and over it. I'm just coming up at the left, bottom left, and going over top right. And I have found that in needlepoint, it does kind of affect the way the knot sits. It tends to push, wherever you're going down, it tends to push the knot towards that direction. So it tends to sit a little bit to the top of the intersection here, to the top right. And so because of that, I do, like in an area like this, I do like to make sure that I'm being consistent in the way that see there, you can see I pulled a little too tight and the intersection popped down. So I can, there we go, grab it, back up. But yeah, I liked to make sure I'm consistent with when I'm doing a bunch of knots all together with, how I'm going over the intersection, because they tend to sit towards where they're pulled down. All right, so that is French knots, and there are quite a few in the pheasants. So they're all along here. They're over here. I'm going to show you French knot and Boolean knot together for these wing areas. They're right here, and then we'll, even maybe go over them with the berries, because kind of coming up through, this is a road stitch right here, the berry is a road stitch, and coming up through the road stitch and then down through the road stitch with the French knot, you want to do that a specific way. So yeah, lots of French knots in this piece, but they're an amazing stitch. I probably use them in every piece that I stitch. They're just wonderful and so cute. Any questions about a French knot? Okay. And guys, don't forget about the question box that you can enter questions into. All right, so then cross stitch 1/2. These little dot areas right here, these are going to be cross stitch 1/2. And the way we're going to do that, they're really easy. You're just going to come up at the base of one of the dots. You're going to go up 2 and over. So you're essentially just covering that area in a long diagonal stitch, and then you're going to go back over and do the same the opposite direction. And there is your cross stitch. So just essentially just covering that area in a cross stitch. Okay, we've got a question here. Do they get bigger or smaller depending on how many times you wrap around the needle? Oh, that is a great question. Yes, up to a point. So typically, the correct way to stitch a French knot is, rather than wrapping more times, if you want a bigger knot, you simply add more thread to your needle. That being said, I think you can go up to, like, I'm completely comfortable wrapping my needle twice. So let me show that to you over here. So that would look like 1, 2, and then going over the intersection. So wrapping your needle twice, you get a great knot out of that. The more you wrap it though, actually the higher the knot gets. So it's not, it makes it bigger, but it makes it taller. And so eventually you start really losing the way it looks. So I wouldn't do more than, 2 to 3 wraps, and you can experiment. Technically you're supposed to just add more thread. So especially if you're using something like a stranded thread, then you would just start adding strands to your needle to get your bigger knot. It's just gonna, generally speaking, look better. Okay, so that is cross stitch 1/2. It's just a cross stitch, but it's, over one intersection on the horizontal and over 2 intersections on the diagonal, or on the vertical. And that is why it's 1/2. 1/1 would be just a little tiny cross stitch. We're going to do that in a moment as an alternative to the bullion knots and the French knots. And then cross stitch 2/2 is your typical cross stitch where you're going over 2 intersections, and it's a square cross stitch, and we're going to do that in these little areas here. Okay, so that wraps up the stitches in the head and chest area here. We're going to move into the body area, and really the main wing here, and the kind of upper body wing. So let's see. Diagonal knitting is a really cool stitch, and that is the stitch used here and in the legs here. This one I'm less familiar with, or I would say less comfortable with. I don't use it a ton, and so with all of these cool little details right here, the bullion knots, but let's see, well, essentially the feather detailing in here, with all of those in the way, compensating it took a little bit more brain work. So one thing I love to do if I'm kind of uncertain how I should compensate an area and having a hard time, I'm very visual. So if I'm having a hard time working out how it should go in my head, first of all, you can always blow up the picture that's included in your stitch guide and see exactly what I did. But you can also take, photocopy your piece and just draw it out with a pencil. And I really love to do that. In fact, I typically do it with a photo on my iPad, and you can even do it probably on your phone with a drawing app. So you don't even need to photocopy it. But just being able to draw out exactly where the stitches go, and typically what I'll do is I'll ignore any of the elements underneath, and I'm compensating around, and I'll just actually draw out the pattern on top of the whole area, and then I'll go back and erase whatever is on top of the area I'm compensating around, and that way I can see exactly what stitches I need to use where. So what I'm going to do, because we're going to technically, I started the stitch down here, but you can't really get a good pattern down here. So we're actually going to start it right up here. So I'm going to grab my DMC 3712, the coral color. And we're using 4 strands again. And let me see. I want to start it. I'm trying to do exactly what I did here. So I'm going to want to start it think 1, 2, 3 right here. Let's just start it right here. Ooh, we've got some questions here. Okay, I did not receive the petite silk in my braid. Ooh, can you message me after the class and I will get that taken care of? I am so sorry about that. You should absolutely have received petite silk in my braid in this kit. Yeah, go ahead in my DMs or send me an email and we'll get that taken care of right away. What drawing app do you use? Procreate. So PRO create. And yeah, it's what I do all my designing in. I do have an iPad Pro, so I have an iPad pencil that I use, but it's a wonderful app. Okay. So I'm going to, let's see, 1, 2, 3. So the way you do diagonal knitting is you go essentially over 2 intersections on the diagonal. So up 1 and over 2. Or if you prefer, I was taught to count by the holes of the canvas rather than the intersections. So you can also go 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3 over. So 1, 2 up, 1, 2, 3 over, but it's essentially over 2 intersections on a diagonal. And then you're going to come up 1 intersection over, down and over. And you're going to again go over 2 intersections. So you can see that what we're doing is we're going into the holes that are 1 intersection over from the last one. And we're working our way down. So over 2 intersections, or 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then this one, if I go ahead and take this stitch, I'm going to be covering up some of that detailing there. So rather than, you can see where my needle's coming up here, this is where I would come up to take that stitch. So rather than taking that stitch, I'm going to come 1 more down and I'm going to leave that stitch empty. So, and then over 1, 2 intersections and down. Okay, so that's our first row. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come up 2 intersections up. So there's an intersection in between where this stitch starts and where this stitch starts, and they're going to meet together in the same hole, creating a diagonal V. So rather than 2 intersections over, it's 2 intersections up that you're covering. Now I'm going to come up 1 intersection up from my last stitch, and then 2 intersections down, and this is going to place me in the center of that first V. So again, an intersection up and over, and the nice thing about once you get into a rhythm is, you know, you're going into the same hole, creating that V, and it's very easy to find. You don't even necessarily have to think, okay, 2 intersections down. And actually, you'll realize that that first row is covering that second intersection. So it's 1, 2, down. We're going to do something very similar, a very similar over 2 intersection when we do interlocking Goblin. Okay, so again, 1, 2 intersections on the vertical and then down. And we have our first row of diagonal knitting. And then, okay, so we're going to want to get past all of this stitch detailing in here, these dots here, and we're going to want to come down to here and start our second row, and we're going to do the exact same thing we did on the first row down. So over 2 intersections, but this time it's actually going to meet up in the same hole as the outside of the V. And then 1 intersection down from our last stitch, and then over 2, that's going to meet up in sort of the upward arm of the V, if that makes sense, same hole. So everything's joining up in the same hole. Okay, and so then if I come down here, let's see, am I going to be, I don't think I want to cover that intersection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump down 1 more. 1, 2, and we're going to go right here. Now I just realized that I should have a stitch here as well, meeting up here. And the reason this looks kind of funny is because we've got half a V here and half a V here, but they're halves of different V's. So they're 1 stitch down from each other, if that makes sense. So you can see how, compensating this area can just get a little bit crazy. But if you have any trouble, just look at the picture or take a photocopy and, draw it out. So you can see if I were drawing, what I would do is I would say, okay, there needs to be a stitch here. And all of a sudden, and a stitch here. And all of a sudden, that pattern makes sense. Those two half V's make sense. But now we're covering areas we don't want to. But if I had drawn that out, I would say, okay, I understand that I just need half a V here and half a V, half a V here and half a V here, and they're different sides, and that's why it looks that way. Okay, so that is diagonal knitting. I would say, it's a fun stitch, and I love it in the pheasant. If you need to ever stitch like a little scarf or something in an ornament, it is just to die for. Now, diagonal knitting does not fit within the French knots up here. So what we're going to do is stitch a skipped tent stitch. And I want to say this is actually a reverse. Yes, so it's a reversed skipped tent stitch. So we're just going to stitch little reverse tent stitches in here, covering the pink area. Oops, daisy. And there's, let me see, I think it's illustration 1. Yeah, so illustration 1 is going to give you the exact placement and amount of reverse skip tent stitches that I did in here. And how far I thought I needed to go, especially in here. You know, I did this whole top row in tent stitch right here, just because it wasn't practical to put diagonal knitting in there. And then similarly, you're going to do the same thing in the legs down here in between these dots that are French knots. You can see these French knots. Again, you're not going to be able to get the diagonal knitting in there well, so you're just going to do a reversed skip tent. And I say skip tent, it's really a reverse tent, but skip tent because it's every other technically. And then in here, you're going to do the same. There, we're not doing diagonal knitting, we're doing interlocking Goblin, but again, it's not going to fit in there. So in that case, we're doing not a reverse tent, we're doing just a normal tent. It's angled the other way. But we're doing a skip tent in there. And that is, this is the illustration 2 shows the exact placement of these. Illustration 3 shows the exact placement of these skip tents. And then illustration 1 so it shows the exact placement of these areas. So take a look at those. And those are all, I think they're on page 2 or 3 of the stitch guide. Okay, that's diagonal knitting. Any questions about that? The other thing you can do if you're struggling with compensating anything, just in general, is almost like we did here, is find a nice open area and get that stitch going. And sometimes I need to kind of anchor myself to then work around an area and figure out, okay, how is this supposed to work? Like, it's very difficult to start compensating right off the bat. Okay, so let's do a bullion knot. Let me see, do I have enough thread here? I think I do. Get this up and out of the way. Okay, so these areas, these feathers right here are just a single. I am going to, let me see. Let me find the page that this is on. It should be on the first page of your stitch diagrams. That will, yep, here we go. So stitch diagrams has a whole page on bullion knots. And in here, I show you exactly how to angle the stitch, where to start and where to end, and then approximately how many times to wrap your bullion knot. So what I'm going to do is, because of the angle of the camera, I'm going to do this backwards, just because I can't really get my arm around my lighting setup here. So what you're going to want to do is start your knot here and end it here. I'm going to do the opposite. So I'll go ahead and teach you how to do the knot and then show you how to do it correctly on the pheasant. And it doesn't matter that much which direction you go in, to be honest. Okay, so you're going to bring your needle up at point A. Then you're going to bring it down at point B. And the length between A and B determines the length of your French knot. And you're going to pull that through and then leave a nice big loop on the surface of your needle point. Then you're going to bring your needle back up at point B, but you're only going to bring it up, halfway through, or you're not going to push that needle all the way through. You're just leaving the end through. So taking the thread that is coming out at the base of the needle here, you're going to start wrapping it around your needle. And for this particular feather detailing, I suggest wrapping 10 times. So I've just wrapped, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to then push those knots down, make more space. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's 10. Okay, so you can see they're tight. I tend to wrap really tightly and then need to loosen. So they're really tight. I push them all the way down against the base of the canvas. And then typically, so what we're going to do is we're going to draw our needle up and through those wraps and draw the thread up and through them as well. So if I left all my wraps that tight, it would be really hard to get the needle through. So what I will do sometimes is I'll put my fingers over them and I'll just kind of loosen them a little bit, where it's kind of easier to slide it in and out. And then I'm going to hold on. I'm going to hold on to all of those wraps. And I'm going to pull my needle up, and I'm kind of twisting it. It's kind of hard to get it through sometimes. There it comes. And I'm just holding, and I'm pulling it through. You can see this loop here. That's starting to be drawn through from the back and tighten. Okay, so I can't pull too much further. I'm going to release it, and you can see that it's kind of all goofy. And I'm going to put my needle against the end. So this is my point B end, and compress those wraps and kind of tighten that thread like so. And then I tend to just play with them a little bit. If it looks great right off the bat, don't worry about it. But I'll just kind of fiddle with them a little bit and make sure they look good. I think people think that, once you've tightened that, you can't really do anything. And a bullion knot can be fiddled with a little bit. Sometimes I do more damage than good by fiddling because the wraps get a little uneven. But okay, let me see. And then you're just going to go down at point A and pull. And you've got a really cute little textural wrapped knot on the top of your work. So in the guide, I suggest that point A is over here and point B is to the bottom of the feather detailing. So start here and end here. But again, because of the angle of the camera or of my lights being in the way, I can't quite get my arm around to do that. And you can see that it really doesn't make that much of a difference in terms of the way it looks. All right, so let's do that again. You do want to give yourself a decent amount of thread when doing this. If your thread is too short, it can get hard. Okay, so come up at point A, go down at point B, leave a loop at the top, come up at point A again. Don't bring your needle all the way through. Wrap it 10 times. Let's see, that was 6. Compress it as you need. Oops. So this is where my thread is a little short. It's getting trickier to work with. Okay. Compress it down so those wraps are all bunched to the bottom. Loosen it up if you need to a little bit. Pinch those wraps. Work your needle up through the wraps. Here it comes. Pull through. Put your needle against the base of the knot. Pull it tight. And then go down at point B. you have your bullion knot. Now, what's really fun about bullion knots is what you're doing in the amount you wrap. So when I said the length between point A and point B will determine the length of the bullion knot. The amount of times you wrap will determine how raised it is. So typically what you want to do is you want to wrap your knot. Oops, so my thread's getting too short here to do this, but let me try to demonstrate. You're going to want to wrap your knot the same, the amount of times that equals the distance between point A and point B. So I can compress that and I can lay my needle down and say, okay, yeah, those wraps are essentially equaling that length, that distance between point A and point B. Like that looks nice. Now, but if you want a loop that raises off of your canvas, then you wrap it more times. And the more times you wrap, the higher that bullion's gonna get. So you can wrap and wrap and wrap, and it can end up raising off of the canvas and be really fun. Okay, we've got a question. This is going to be so much fun. Oh, awesome. Yes. They are fun. They're a blast. I love them. I think they take just trying and relaxing and just enjoying. Like don't stress if they don't look perfect. And just try a few on the side. Like they're just a blast. And they're amazing in needlepoint. And I mean, I did an embroidered girl once with just tons of bullion knot hair, and they're just so cute. So yeah, they're a great one. Okay, let's see if, do you change needle size to a smaller with the bullion knot? I don't. Yeah, I don't do that. Trying to think if there would be any advantage to that. I don't think so, because ultimately you're wrapping those wraps around the needle, and it's not necessarily going to make it, the wraps are going to be the size of the needle, whether you use a large one or a small one. So it's not necessarily going to make it easier to draw it up. And I don't know that you would necessarily want the wraps to be smaller here. So I would just go ahead and use your size 22, the one that comes in the kit. But if you want to go ahead and try it with a different needle, if you think for some reason that would help, then I would absolutely try it out. Yeah. The other thing that could be helpful is a rubber gripper. They make needle grippers. They're just little, they're like this big, maybe an inch and a half, circular rubber flat things that you can grab with your needle, use it to grab your needle and pull it up, and that can really help with a bullion knot. Let's see. Sorry, thinner needle to make it easier to slide the loops off. Yeah, I don't know that it would make a difference. I guess I would have to really experiment with that and just see. But because you're using that thread to wrap around the needle, whether it's a big needle or a small needle, that's determining, how tight they are. Yeah, my best advice is just to really gently try to loosen the thread a little bit, or use a needle gripper if you're having a hard time. Yeah. Okay, let's do a bullion knot and French knot combo in this area here. Okay. So, again, go ahead and look at the stitch diagrams. The stitch diagrams are going to show you, I've got it printed here, but their color in the PDF. They're going to show you exactly where to start and where to end your bullion knot and how many times to wrap it. Okay, so I'm going to do this one right here. I'm going to come up, point A, and then down at point B. I'm pretty sure, let's see, yes. Oop, you know what? I'm going to have to do it opposite again because of my lights. So we're going to call this point A, this point B. Come up. And we're going to wrap this one 10 times as well. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Press those down. Let's see, make sure they're not too loose. Grab the wraps and try to, there we go, work that through, pull it tight. And then put at the base and pull it tight. And then I'm going to go down at point B. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of shove that over and press it down so it kind of gets a nice little loop there. Or not exactly loop, but curve. And then, so you see now I have two intersections at the top here. I'm going to come up, wrap my needle once, and go down over the top of the intersection to create a French knot. And then come up, move my bullion knot out of the way a little bit, wrap once, and go down. And I have my little feather detailing right there. So all of these guys right here are a combination of French knots and bullion knots. All right. If you just really are like, that looks fun, but not for me, then you can do a cross stitch alternative. And that is going to be on the last page of the stitch diagrams. So I show you exactly where to put the cross stitches. So we're going to use a combination of cross stitch 1 over 1 and cross stitch 2 over 2. So anywhere you have a French knot, you would just do a cross stitch 1 over 1. But if you have a combination, you're going to do, let me see, trying to think of which way I like to go first here. Yes, so come up, go over the base of the feather detailing with a big cross stitch, like so. And then these two little dots right here, we're going to do cross stitch 1 over 1. So you're just going to go over a single intersection just like a tent stitch, and then back the opposite direction over the top of it like a reverse tent stitch. And then we're going to do that for the top of that feather detailing. Like so. That's just going to raise it up a little bit above the tent stitch, below it, and distinguish it. So you can also do anywhere there's French knots, you can do that little cross stitch 1 over 1 instead of a French knot. And again, that's going to show you, I'm going to show you that in this illustration, kind of how all those would work together. Here's cross stitch 1 over 1 instead of French knots. All right, we have a question here. How do you secure the knots when the stitch is complete? So they're secured by the thread that's running through the knot. So when we bring that needle up through the bullion knot, that's actually securing them to the canvas. So by coming up and then over and then up, and we do those wraps. You know, when you draw this up through the wraps, you're actually drawing that thread up through the wraps. And now this would be wrapped, and we would bring it down again. So I know that's not a super great illustration, but hopefully that helps. So you would, you know, you're tightening it. This thread right here that's now straight across is actually winding around this thread that I'm now tightening. But then on the back, when you're ready to snip, when you're ready to snip the complete thread. Yeah. So any way that you would normally tie off. So typically you can just pull it up and out of the way, you know, of an area where you're going to go back and stitch over. Or I also like to just run my needle back through stitching that's already there. So just how you normally would tie off your thread or end your thread. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's do the horizontal interlocking Goblin. I love this stitch. It's just a really fun one. So I'm going to stretch my thread all the way down here. I'm using the yellow 783, and we're going to do a horizontal interlocking Goblin that is angled from bottom left to top right. And let me just get a good area. Here we go. So this is similar to diagonal knitting stitch in that we're going to go over 2 intersections and down. Or 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and down. So you can see that rather than like a 10 stitch, it's going over 1 intersection. On the diagonal, it's going over 2 intersections. It's kind of encompassing 2 intersections. And then we're going to come up 1 hold down from our previous stitch, go over 2 intersections, and go down 1 hold down from our previous stitch. Down. 1, 2, down. So that's our first row. And then we're going to come up 1 hole or intersection over to the right. And you're going to again go over 2 intersections, and this is going to place you squarely in the middle of your last stitch. Now you're not splitting the stitch in half, but it's kind of it's interlocking with the previous row. So I'm going to go up 1 intersection or hole from my last stitch and over 2, and you can see I'm going to go down into a hole that is in the middle of my last row of stitches. Just like so. And I just think this is such a fun stitch to actually stitch because it's just that interlocking is really fun. So 1, 2, and down. And I'm trying not to actually split my stitches. Probably wouldn't be the end of the world if I did. So now when I go down, I'm actually going into the same hole as my original row ends in. Like that. And you just continue. If you have you know, an area that you need to end short and compensate, you can always just take a 10 stitch again, like we will you know, in between here. So that is horizontal interlocking Goblin. We're going to do the same thing up here in the tail, and actually the same thing for the eye. So for the eye, you're just going to, instead of doing 2 10 stitches, which you absolutely could, the eye is 2 intersections. Rather than taking 2 10 stitch there, I just did a single horizontal interlocking Goblin, where it just was, 1 stitch over the 2 intersections on the diagonal right there. I could do it in yellow here for you guys. I should have brought my black with me, but 1, 2, just like that. So then when you get to the tail area, the fun thing about interlocking Goblin is it can go any direction. So you can see that, hopefully that's in focus a bit, that is a vertical version of this, and it angles any way. So it can angle this way, it can angle, well, let me do this with my needle, this way, it can angle this way, it can angle this way or this way. So it's great in that it can follow kind of any direction of any area. So with vertical, and it's such a little area, it's going to be kind of hard to show you, but with vertical, you're going to go over 2 intersections and down. So it's more of an upright stitch. So over 2 intersections, just like so. So 1 up from my previous stitch, and then 2 intersections and down, 1 up from my previous stitch. And then when I go to do my next row, it's 1, 2 down. And this one doesn't actually fall in between the same way. So 1, 2 down. It's almost like an elongated 10 stitch. But not quite. Yeah. And that I think is on, let me just check. That stitch diagram I'm pretty sure is on the 4th page of the stitch diagrams. Yes. Okay, any questions about that one? I think our final one is Freeform leaf stitch, which I'm really excited to show you guys. Okay. So leaf stitch, I called it Freeform leaf stitch because we're following the canvas, but we're not following the holes. It's not a geometric stitch, right? Like most needlepoint. It's kind of more of an embroidery stitch. So rather than following this pattern on the canvas, which I'm going to show you an alternative of how to do that, but rather than following this pattern, we're going to kind of do our own thing. And you can see it here. So we're going to start with our red. It's Hot Lips 555 Tilly Thomas Essentials. And we're going to start by placing a single long stitch. And I'm going to try to do what I did before, but it's going to be kind of tricky. I think I'm going to make this stitch pretty long too. I'm going to come up here. Actually, let me leave a waist knot. Do this properly over here. Okay. I'm going to come up here and go all the way to the tip of the tail. So I'm using the bright red. Okay. And now I'm going to come up on either side. And let me see where that stitch diagram is at and show it to you guys. And again, the illustrations they're a little dark, they're colored and easier to read. So here is the stitch diagram and written instructions, and then an example of how I'm stitching this here. Okay. So then we're going to go, let's see, 1 hole up from my previous stitch, and then I want to come up again on the side. I'm going to do it right here, just like that. Oops, Daisy got caught. Okay, so I've took those 2 those 2 stitches on either side of my first stitch, and I've met them together in a single hole. Okay, so then I'm going to grab my dark red Current 557 Tilly Thomas Essentials, and you're going to want to use 2 needles for this stitch. So have 2 needles going at once, and let's see, I'll put my waist knot up here, and then I'm going to come up on the side of my previous stitches, and let me see, let's put them, let's put it right here. So again, this is really just kind of a judgment call. And let's do that. Now, usually you really do want to bring your needle and thread to the top every time you are switching between threads. But because we're switching back and forth so often, I'm just going to leave my thread under there and kind of hold it out of the way as I work. Because I don't want to have to bring, my bright red to the top every time I use the dark red and then bring it back down to keep working. It's just a little bit tedious. Okay, I think... yeah, let's bring it up right here. I don't want my stitches to get too super short, but I think we're doing good right now. I want them to have a nice strong V, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this out of the way, grab my dark one, and bring it up on the edge of the area here. And I'm pretty much just working one intersection or hold down from my previous one. That's going to change eventually. I think, don't want to encroach too much into that green area, so I'm going to kind of angle my stitch that way. Let's see. Yeah, let's bring it up here. And you can see that as I round this corner, essentially, let me see, do I want to go here? I think I want to go, let's try it here. We're going to see if this gets, there's too much canvas exposed. But as you round this corner, the outside stitches are getting longer and the inside stitches are getting shorter. Okay, so let's see if that worked. I think I could get away with it. So you can see that there's a little bit of canvas peeking in here. So probably once I put another stitch in, it would be fine. I may be inclined to pull it out and not reach the stitch so far. If I put it right here instead, I'm definitely not going to have that problem. Yeah, let's go for that. And then maybe we'll get a nice big stitch out of this next one. And because my stitches are getting so short, I'm going to share, I'm going to bring this stitch up and share the hole with this bright red one that's just before it. So essentially what we're doing is we're working down the canvas on either side. We're joining them together in the middle. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to have that join be in the center of the feather here. And you can see that in the stitch diagram. When you do that, see how it's joining in the center. You've got all these nicely angled stitches, but because it's freeform, what we're going to end up happening is have happening is that sometimes, you know, these outside stitches are going to share holes. Sometimes these inside where they're joining is not going to be in the dead center of the feather. It's just more freeform. It's kind of more by feel than anything else. And it's always okay, just take it out and readjust, but also don't, it doesn't have to be perfect because it's not going to be, right? It is freeform, right? It's not going to be dead on, if that makes sense. Now the alternative here would be to do an alternating continental stitch, which is a really lovely stitch. And that is essentially just a skip 10 stitch where you will actually just follow the stitch pattern that is printed on the feather here, and you use the dark to work down on the dark intersections, like so. Essentially like a skip tent, and I would go all the way down, but I'm going to skip back up so you guys can see it. Oop, got caught there. I need to tape the edge of my canvas. And then when you go back with the lighter red, oops daisy, you're going to go the opposite direction. So you're going to angle your stitches. So that was a skip tent. This is more like a reverse skip tent. So they are angled the opposite way. Or think about stitching a basket weave and you've done half of the stitches the opposite direction to the other half. So we're just going over one intersection of the canvas. But you can see that it's just a really fun, textured, kind of pretty diamond pattern almost. And I didn't look at my stitch diagram. I'm probably maybe doing this in the wrong order. So definitely take a look at your stitch diagrams, but that is essentially the gist of the stitch. You could also stitch the whole thing, you know, in a tent stitch to get kind of these stripes here, which is also really pretty. So that almost a checkery pattern. So yeah, lots of different options there. The freeform leaf stitch is just an absolute blast. I think it's just so textural and just makes that area kind of pop. But these are also really, really great options. Let's see. If the last thing I think I wanted to mention is that if you can see any area underneath your bullion knots that's bothering you, like I can see a little bit of canvas peeping out here, you can always push it back and just add a few 10 stitches under there if you feel any canvas is exposed and that's bothering you. But I think that is it. Let me turn commenting back on and see if you guys have any questions. Okay. Thank you guys all so much for being here. Again, comment. You can also comment on this video once it's posted. DM me, or I'm most able to respond, or I am most reachable through my email. So if you have any questions and need help, please let me know. I can't wait to see how you guys do, and you enjoy stitching it and all of that. So, all right. Thank you everyone so much. Have a lovely night.